All right, let's dive into the sharp, cynical, and maybe just a little too relevant ideas of H.L. Mencken. He had this theory that the real engine driving democracy isn't hope or progress or any of that good stuff. Nope, for Mencken, it's all about fear. And this quote right here, this is the whole idea in a nutshell. Mencken saw the entire political process as just one big, relentless monster hunt. So, what kind of monsters are we talking about? Well, he had a very specific name for them: bugaboos. So that brings us to our first section, the bugaboo theory. We're going to break down this core concept of imaginary monsters and how Mencken believed they completely shaped the political world. Okay, so a bugaboo is basically a manufactured fear. It's a threat that's designed to create a panic, even if it's not actually real or immediate. Think of it less like a monster hiding under your bed and more like a ghost that's deliberately set loose to haunt the halls of power. It's a key player in the whole theater of democracy. And for Mencken, this was nothing new. He saw it as this constant, recurring theme throughout American history. He argued you could basically trace the nation's entire story just by listing the so-called monsters it was hunting at any given time. The redcoats, the bank, the Kaiser. The specific enemy changes, but the hunt, that's forever. And this gets right to the heart of why the bugaboo theory is so powerful. Mencken was convinced that fear is a way more powerful motivator than hope. He argued that the public doesn't rally for some brilliant constructive idea. Instead, they unite against a common enemy. You're not voting for something. You're voting against the monster. Okay, so if politics is just one big monster hunt, who's handing out the torches and pitchforks? Well, this leads us to the star of the show in Mencken's theory, the demagogue. Or, as Mencken brilliantly put it, the architects of alarm. You see, Mencken saw the demagogue as a kind of professor of mob psychology. Their whole game is built on understanding and manipulating fear. They don't win with logical arguments or complicated policies. They win by finding or, just inventing a bugaboo and then leading the charge against it. And this whole system creates a really interesting paradox. Mencken argued that it actually punishes talented, capable leaders. Why? Because a brilliant leader with big ideas becomes a shining mark. They're an easy target for a demagogue to paint as dangerous. And in a political game that's all about fear, the public will almost always pick the safe, colorless mediocrity they can't possibly be scared of. Mencken used the politician William Jennings Bryan as a perfect example of this. He said Bryan was totally on track to win back in 1896 by chasing the bugaboo of plutocracy, rule by the super wealthy. But then he made a huge mistake. He started talking about a complex economic program. The public couldn't understand it, and because they couldn't understand it, they started to fear it. He accidentally gave his opponents a brand new bugaboo to hunt, his own policies. So we've got the theory down, but what does this bugaboo hunt actually look like in the real world? Well, Mencken pointed to one single moment in American history that he believed just laid the entire playbook bare: the country's entry into World War I. I mean, just look at this timeline. It shows a truly mind-blowing reversal. In 1915 and 16, the American public was completely against the war. President Wilson literally won re-election by promising to keep America out. And yet just a few months later, public opinion had done a complete 180. How on earth does a change that fast and that total even happen? Well, according to Mencken, the demagogues simply offered the public a choice of fears. On the one hand, you had the current reality, a Germany already bogged down in a massive, draining war. But on the other hand, they presented this manufactured fear, a future, victorious Germany suddenly free from its enemies and now turning its vengeful eyes toward America. This new, bigger monster quickly ate the old one. But just getting people to accept the war wasn't enough. The goal was pure, raw enthusiasm. Mencken laid out a 4-step process. First, they cooked up new, even scarier bugaboos, spies, saboteurs, you name it. Anything to create a panic. Then came the draft. And this is where Mencken gets really cynical. He observed that once most men were sure they personally wouldn't have to go fight, they suddenly became the loudest, most heroic supporters of the war. It basically became a spectator sport for them. And here's the absolute kicker. This whole tidal wave of fear was completely disconnected from the actual real-world threat. The enemy was 3,000 miles away and in no shape to attack the United States. And yet, through this relentless bugaboo hunt, the entire nation was convinced it was under immediate, constant, mortal danger. So let's pull all this together. What's the final takeaway from Mencken's absolutely blistering critique of how democracy works? What is he really trying to tell us here?
To put it bluntly, Mencken thought the whole democratic process was a kind of grand illusion. Yeah, we like to think it's this noble, rational debate about competing ideas, but he saw something way more primal, something much darker at work. Just a relentless cycle of manufactured panic, an endless stampede away from one imaginary monster and right toward the next.
So let's just nail down those core arguments one last time. 1. Politics is a perpetual monster hunt. 2. Voters are motivated by what they're against, not what they're for. 3. Demagogues are the master architects of all this fear. And 4. This whole system ends up favoring mediocrity over real talent. Now, Mencken wrote all of this almost 100 years ago. And that, of course, brings us to the final and most important question. Looking at the world around us today, how relevant is his cynical theory on fear and bugaboos and politics? That's definitely one worth thinking about. Thanks for tuning in.